Hello, today we're talking about walking the growth path. Despite what you read on LinkedIn, or despite what an agency might say, or a consultant might say, or despite really what you want, there is no secret magic to growth. There's no growth hack or growth tactic that's going to get your company to transformational growth. We all want to be able to open a growth door and walk through it and be at growth, but that doesn't exist. So today we're going to talk about walking the growth path. The way to transformational growth for your company is walking the growth path, is doing the right things every day, walking that path step by step. Now, sometimes it may feel like you're running down the path, and then sometimes it'll almost feel like you're walking backwards. But every company needs to walk the path to transformational growth. And this is hard for some CEOs to hear because we all want that quick growth. We all want those quick wins, but that's just not the way it works. One time we were brought in to work with a CEO of a company, and I'll call him Ed. Now, Ed was a great guy. He really cared about his company. He cared about his employees. He was really smart, but he was always focused on opening these growth doors. And when Ed first started as CEO, his company was growing, and actually he received investment from a PE firm. And I think we've all seen this before. The challenge with the investment is that you have more money to spend on marketing, but you also have significantly increased pressure for growth. So what was Ed's response to this? Well, he wanted to find that growth door. He wanted to find that thing he could just open and walk through it and say, hey, look, PE firm, we're growing. And so what did that mean for him? Well, he was looking at things like paid search. They invest millions in paid search. He was looking at organic search, A/B testing. You talk to new consultants and agencies. It was always something new to find this quick path to growth. And the worst thing is that his team started to act that way too. They would implement things for quick wins and then report out on vanity metrics. But you know what wasn't increasing was revenue. Now, this is not to say it never worked. Occasionally, Ed would be able to put together his PowerPoint presentation, walk into the board meeting and say, look, it's up and to the right. But then the next month, the growth wouldn't be there. And then the following month, the growth wouldn't be there. There wasn't sustainable long-term growth. Eventually, the PE firm got tired of it. And they said, hey, we needed to work something out. And so they brought us in to work with Ed to come up with a path to growth. And it was hard because Ed was so focused on these growth doors. He was so convinced there was a short-term win. And the question is, why was Ed this way? I mean, he was a smart guy. He really cared about his company. And there's what we see is that there's a few common denominators here for people that operate this way. One is that they're data driven. Now, I love data. I mean, I think data is really meaningful and should definitely be utilized if it's used in the right way. But every day, Ed was in the dashboards. He was in the analytics. He was so convinced in those long lists of numbers, there was that quick win. Two, Ed came up in performance marketing, and I put it in quotes because I don't like the term performance marketing, but that was his background. So when things got tough for Ed, he would always go back to performance marketing. It's where he felt comfortable. And the third thing, and probably the worst thing, is that, like I said, when Ed first started out, they were implementing these performance marketing tactics and they worked. And we actually see this a lot. I mean, I know performance marketing, and again, I don't like the term, gets a bad rap, but if a company, and this is what we see, if a company has like brand authority, they've built up some presence, but hasn't focused on some of these performance tactics, when they put them in place, they actually will see a bump in growth. If you improve your website, if you improve your messaging, if you improve your sales process, you will see that bump in growth. The problem is you'll reach a plateau, you'll grow, you'll reach a plateau, and you won't continue to grow. And so that's not a long-term path to growth. So that's why Ed was focused on these things. He was data-driven. He came up in performance marketing and had seen some success in the past, but he needed to move away from it to actually be able to find long-term growth. And this is why I actually love some of these founder-led growth posts on LinkedIn, because when you look at this, when you look at their stories, if they're being honest, you'll see that not everything is a win. You'll see that some days are tough and maybe many days are tough, but if they're following the right path, they will find growth. So how do you walk the growth path? Well, I'm just going to put together some simple things for you to focus on now, and we'll get into more details later about how you actually implement these. But first, you need to know where you're going. You need to establish a growth vision for your organization and get alignment around it. Second, you need to know where you are. So you need to establish baselines. And this is more challenging than you'd think for a lot of companies. A lot of companies that we work with don't have good metrics and reporting, just basic good metrics and reporting. And so we'll work with them to understand where they are now. We'll establish that baseline. So you need to know where you're going and where you are now. And then you need to put in best practices. You need to learn them and put in best practices so you make sure that you're walking the path correctly. And then the next thing is, after you've established your growth vision, you need to be prepared to say no to things that are going to take you off your path. Now, you may read something on LinkedIn or in another article, a consultant or agency may come in and say, this is what you need to do. It'll be really tempting to go back to it, but it's going to lead you off the path. So if it's not in your growth vision, you're going to have to say no to it. And then finally, you need to map out your path. And so what we like to do is put together a growth action plan, which maps out that path. And now this isn't static. It will change to a certain extent. Maybe it's competitive things change, product changes, market conditions change. You need to be prepared to change to a certain extent, but you need to know the path that you're walking. So 5 things to help you walk down the growth path. 1, know where you're going, establish that growth vision. Know where you are, establish those baseline metrics. Put best practices in place. Be prepared to say no to some things, and then just map out your growth path.